Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you kindly for stopping by. I'd like to thank Raman Yang of CCTV Africa for yesterday's interview about the Euros, Super Mario, Draghi and the impact on Africa. And it's always a pleasure speaking with Raman. He is very knowledgeable. I'd also like to thank Bonnie Tunya for yesterday's interview on CNBC Africa. The link for that is on the front page of the website and also on Rich Rappap's Home Thoughts Turn Back to Dr. Seuss. My favourite book of Dr. Seuss was something called Where's Your Mother Gone, I think, and it's about this, I think it's a little chick that's lost its mother and throughout the book is looking for her. It's a lovely story, it reminds me of my mother, but I've got some other quotes today. You have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes, you can steer yourself any direction you choose. You're on your own and you know what you know, and you are the one who'll decide where to go. You're off to great places, today is your day, your mountain is waiting, so get on your way. Thomas Pynchon, who I'm very fond of, writes, keep cool but care. And then this, from Inherent Vice, which has been made into a movie recently. What goes around may come around, but it never ends up exactly the same place. You ever notice? Like a record on a turntable. All it takes is one groove's difference and the universe can be on to a whole nother song. I like this photograph of President Obama in India. I'll put that up, I found it from Politico. Gallup is saying President Obama's job approval is now at 50%, which is the highest in more than a year. Putin has made some allegations saying the Ukraine army is a NATO legion aimed at restraining Russia. The Ukrainian army is essentially a NATO legion which doesn't pursue the national interests of Ukraine, but persists to restrict Russia, President Putin says. We often say Ukrainian army, but who is really fighting there? There are indeed partially official units of armed forces, but largely they are the so-called volunteer nationalist battalions. He added that the intention of Ukrainian troops is connected with achieving the geopolitical goals of restraining Russia. It's not an army, but a foreign legion, in this case a foreign NATO legion, which of course doesn't pursue the national interests of Ukraine. Unfortunately, official Kiev authorities refuse to follow the path of a peaceful solution. They don't want to resolve the crisis using political tools, he added. It is essentially a civil war in Ukraine. In my view, many in Ukraine already understand this, he added. The NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg reacted to President Putin's words, calling his statement nonsense. The statement, "There is a NATO legion in Ukraine," is nonsense. There is no NATO legion, he said. I think Putin has a point. And I'll put up a photograph of people removing debris near the building damaged by shelling on Saturday in Mariupol, eastern Ukraine. The real Banksy tweeted, "River in Japan filled with cherry blossom petals." Rather attractive it is too. Coming to international markets, owners of $4 trillion of bonds pay to lend to the government and say they are no fools. Bond prices are now so high that yields on more than $4 trillion of the developed world's sovereign debt have turned negative. That means investors effectively pay a dozen countries from Germany to France and Japan to borrow. TAN purchased German 5-year notes, this is referencing an investor. When yields plunged to zero this month, the debt has since rallied, pushing yields to an all-time low of minus 0.06%. The rate was minus 0.017% yesterday in London. All around the world, bond yields have hit one low after another. Benchmark yields in all 25 developed nations tracked by Bloomberg have fallen this year. In Switzerland, investors are paying the government to borrow for longer than a decade. For euro area nations, average yields tumbled to a record 0.68%. We're back to this return of capital and not return on capital time, said Chris Ahrens. Last week alone, 30-year bonds issued by Greece and Portugal, which yield 7.71 and 3.35%, rallied by most among developed countries tracked by Bloomberg. Demand for US Treasuries sent the 30-year yield to a record low of 2.33% on Monday. And I wrote about this on the 12th of January when I was talking about Europe being off balance. And I said if European bond yields, they're at record all-time lows, are the signal in the noise, then this means Europe is in danger of a major death spiral. And I said, the economic blowback from the frozen conflict in Ukraine with Russia has exacted a price as well. Economics and geopolitics are more intertwined than ever before, which was something interestingly the World Economic Forum said as well. If European bond yields are the signal in the noise, then this means Europe is in danger of a major death spiral, I added. Currency markets, the euro was last trading at 122.40, dollar index 94.90, Japanese yen 118.27, Swissy 0.9029, pound 150.86, traded above 151 overnight. Aussie 0.9744, bit of a bounce there. Indian rupee 61.404. South Korean won 1080.97. That's been a strong currency of late. Rial 258.31. Egyptian pound, which has been on a weakening track, and I'll come to that in a moment, last trading at 743.89. And the rand 1145.54. The US Federal Reserve starts a two-day policy meeting on Tuesday, and investors are keen to hear its take on the rash of policy easings from the Eurozone to Canada and Switzerland. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. My target is 100. Peter Gano retweeted the FT, who said the dollar rally is only just getting started, and saying a typical dollar rally lasts roughly 6 to 7 years, suggesting this one is just getting started. And I spoke about this severally on the 29th of September. I said the point I'm making is that the dollar has just started getting going. There will be blood in the water. There is a small window if we want to be the sharks, I said. The US economy, in my view, is the comeback kid of 2015, and I think that view was confirmed by the IMF, who upgraded only the US in their latest World Economic Update release. Euro dollar last trading at 112.47. I'm targeting parity. Bloomberg is saying data may show prices in the euro area are falling at close to the fastest pace since the shared currency was introduced 16 years ago. JP Morgan is also calling for parity now as well. That link is on the website as well. I called for parity early in the year, and I think it's headed even lower in point of fact. Goldman Sachs' Cone says oil prices may hit $30 in this extended slump. We're probably in the lower, longer view. WTI fell 44 cents to close at $45.15 a barrel on NYMEX, which was the lowest settlement since March 11, 2009. Crude oil last trading at $45.25 when I checked. I can see it's now at $45.08. I think we're still headed lower. I do not see a near-term bounce in the oil price. I think it could average $50 a barrel for the next 24 months. And I said then there is no Hail Mary pass coming. Gold, 1276.455, lost as much as 0.7% to touch 1272.44 yesterday, which was the lowest price since Jan 19. Bulls getting a little bit nervous ahead of the Fed. Russia has been downgraded to junk by S&P. S&P said the downgrade the first time in a decade that Russia has been assessed as below investment grade by one of the major credit ratings agencies was a reflection of its belief that Russia's financial system is weakening and therefore limiting the central bank of Russia's ability to transmit monetary policy. Economists are anticipating a very painful recession in Russia this year, with the IMF predicting a 3% contraction, followed by a 1% drop in 2016. From this article in the FT, Mr. Szabo said that thanks to the drop in oil prices, the growth model is lost for Russia, and that is a point. If the oil price continues to fall, which I think it will, Russian assets will continue to lose value. Once the oil price bottoms, then Russia will be quite a good buying opportunity. And I concluded by saying the geopolitical grandmaster, Vladimir Putin, never saw the 21st century oil and currency warfare specialist, Barack Obama, coming. Congo protests expose weakness of Kabila's coalition, says Reuters. Protests that blocked a reform which could have extended President Kabila's rule have exposed deep rifts in his ruling coalition and galvanized opposition, increasing the chance of further unrest ahead of elections next year. Kabila took power in the DRC in 2001 following the assassination of his father, won disputed elections in 2006 and 2011. Africa's largest copper producer, but his constituents nearly barred from seeking a third term. A government bill to require a national census before the vote, which the opposition said would have delayed it by years, led to 4 days of street protests last week, in which rights groups said more than 40 people were killed by security forces. Western powers and the influential Catholic Church called for the reform to be scrapped. Legislators bowed to public pressure at the weekend and abandoned the census requirement in a dramatic climb down. With constitutional term limits looming for several presidents in the region, not least in neighbouring Congo Republic, the outcome of the crisis is being closely watched across the continent. For Philip Bioya, politics professor at the University of Kinshasa, the most significant outcome of the showdown was the gaping divisions exposed within the president's governing coalition, and this is a good point. Kabila's majority has been rocked in recent months by high-profile defections, including the governor of Katanga and Jean-Claude Muyambo, head of a party which withdrew from Kabila's coalition and was arrested in Kinshasa last week as he helped organize the demonstrations. The rifts are almost irreparable. The damage is too great. They won't ever be together, Bioya said. South African-based economic research group NKC said the blocking of the provision could signal the start of scheming and backstabbing among Kabila's allies, who think he will step down in 2016 and may seek to succeed him. The public mood continues to simmer with rage against the president, says another fellow. We think there will be more trouble when the intentions of Mr. Kabila and his possible successors become clear. This is the first time we've seen popular pressure in the streets of Kinshasa have a dramatic impact on policy, said Jason Stearns, a Congo analyst at the Rift Valley Institute. The question of Kabila's term limits is turning out to be something that a broad swathe of Congolese opinion can rally against, regardless of political affiliation, regardless of ethnic belonging. Finally, somebody's saying, I don't see this as being massive support for the opposition, not yet from the perspective of 2016. I think it's more a massive opposition to Kabila staying in power. Put up a photograph of a police officer standing guard in front of a store that was looted during violent protests in Kinshasa. And I take you back to what I wrote at the time of the events in Ouagadougou. I called it Ouagadougou's signal to sub-Saharan Africa. And I was saying, that during the Arab Spring, nearly all commentators spoke of how this North African wildfire could not leap the Sahara and head to sub-Saharan Africa. The reasons were that the state incumbents had a monopoly on the tools of violence and would bring overwhelming force and violence to bear. We need to ask ourselves, how many people can an incumbent shoot stone cold dead in such a situation? 100? 1,000, 10,000, and I said this is another point. There is a threshold beyond which the incumbent can't go. Where that threshold lies will be discovered in the throes of the event, and essentially the Senate of the DRC blinked this time. And I said the preeminent point to note is that protests in Burkina Faso achieved escape velocity. I came across this image of events in Kinshasa from a few days ago from Twitter handle Observateur. Ivory Mafia, how criminal gangs are killing Africa's elephants. Shortly before 11 a.m. on the last Saturday in May, a heavily laden white Mitsubishi truck pulled into the Fuji Motors East Africa car dealership in an industrial neighborhood in the northern edge of Mombasa. The truck's cargo was not household equipment as declared, but 228 elephant tusks and 74 ivory pieces weighing a total of 2,152 kilograms. When Kenyan police officers raided the car 5 days later, they refused a bribe of 5 million shillings, seized the ivory and arrested 2 men. The bust was one of the biggest in the country's history, but the suspected mastermind, Faisal Muhammad Ali, aged 46, had escaped. Saying people who get apprehended are mainly the foot soldiers, the poachers or foreign middlemen. There hasn't been a single kingpin prosecuted. DNA tests on large ivory seizures over the last 5 years have shown the vast majority is sourced from 2 areas, Tanzania's Seuss Reserve and Central Africa's Congo Basin rainforest. Almost all of it ends up in large consolidated stockpiles at the ports of Mombasa, Dar es Salaam and Zanzibar. Ivory is worth more than $2,100 per kilo at market, with the rests rare. It's a terrible tragedy, it really is. And I really appreciate all these folks who are trying desperately to do something about it. I'll put up a photograph of elephants crossing the road in front of us in the Amboseli. Look at the backside of the one that's closest to the photographer, i.e. me. Standard Chartered sees Africa future amid branch network review. Has operated in Africa for more than 150 years, said the continent remains part of its consumer banking plans even as the lender reviews its global branch network. Lenders considering closing branches as more customers migrate to online and mobile transactions. It is still Standard Chartered's ambition to be the leading international retail bank within our footprint in Africa, Asia and the Middle East. Diana Layfield, whom I met not too long ago. With digital access comes a reduction in branch traffic, so it is only natural for us to review our current branches and optimize our digital platforms. Standard Chartered said last year it may close 80 to 100 out of more than 1,200 branches globally. As this is an ongoing process, we are unable to provide a geographic breakdown at this stage. Diana Layfield again. Standard Chartered has offices in 16 African countries and has been among the top 3 arrangers of syndicated loans in the sub-Saharan region since 2010. Operating profit at the Africa business fell 27% to $209 million in the first 6 months of 2014 from a year earlier. The South African All Shares up 1.22% in 2015 and is now at 4-week highs and is closed above 50,000, I think, for the first time this year. That could be corrected. In my weekend piece I mentioned that the South, Johannesburg, had a good run last week, which has followed on. And I think some of this is posited on some of the QE money flowing into South Africa as it searches for yield. Dollar rand 11.45.41, Egyptian pound 7.43.90, weakened from 7.39 at the last sale at a central bank auction. This is the weakest level it has been allowed to reach since auctions began in December 2012, and the sixth consecutive official depreciation. The Egyptian stock market is on a roll this year. It's up 10.21% year to date. Nigeria all-share is down 14.07% year to date and is the worst performing stock index anywhere in the world. The Naira closed at 191.10, a new record low against the dollar, compared with Friday's record low close of 190.60. One dealer traded the Naira at a one-off rate of 194.10 during the midday session. Apparently, over 100 people, mainly militants, died in the fight for Nigeria's Maiduguri. This is Reuters. Ghana Stock Exchange is down 3.42% year to date. Tunisia is beginning to market a 10-year US dollar benchmark around the 6% yield area. Fortune magazine has written, but we have yet to see the article that's coming out next month. But they've said few countries offer greater promise than Kenya, so we look forward to reading that article. Old Mutual said Monday it had bought another 37.3% of UAP holdings, taking its stake in the Kenyan insurer to 60.7%. The Anglo-South African financial services company will pay about $155.5 million in cash for the stake bought from the Abraj Group Africa Invest and Swedfund. Earlier this month, they'd bought a 23.3% stake in UAP for $97.6 million. And essentially, they've spent the bulk of their Africa war chest on this UAP stake in Kenya. If you haven't read my piece over the weekend, which was Kenyan asset markets, I've been displaying a lot of alpha. Do take a look. I quoted Pradeep Panrana, who was drawing a parallel between where we find ourselves now and the boom years of 2006, 2007. And subsequently, he tweeted the best years for Kenya starting now, Kenya in top 7 in the new world of business, via Fortune magazine. Kenya Airways rallied 7.58% yesterday to close at a 6-month high of 1065. It's up 22.413% year to date. Mumias Sugar rallied 3.85%. That's up 38.461% year to date. Uchumi up 27.86% year to date. Nairobi All Share closed lower, 0.64% yesterday. It remains plus 1.67% year to date. NSE 20 outpacing the All Share for the first time since 2012 is up 1.9%. Rio Vipingo reported an 18% fall in annual profit, wholly attributable to much lower theoretical gains arising from the valuation of biological assets, they said. I hope to see you on Saturday at Mindspeak, where I will be my own guest, and I'm just going to cover issues like the oil war, currency markets, the world as we find it, Africa in 2015, and Kenya and East Africa. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Hope I can see you there. Mindspeak is a free to attend forum, and it's most enjoyable. Do come. And if you want to track the stock market in trading hours, then just register on rich.co.ke, get a password, and go to Rich Live, and you can follow the markets to your heart's desire. Once again, thank you.